So 2 weeks ago, I made a video about things that would cause a performer to not want to play a composer's music. And it is only fair, as I said in that video, to make the opposite video of things that performers do that make composers not want to work with them again or in general. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Again, I am not trying to single out any single person or any group of people. This is just a general overview of what I think. And a lot of this is going to be very similar to the composer side of things, but I think it's worthwhile restating, and it's also worthwhile putting into a performer's perspective because sometimes we don't realize what we're doing. So, the first thing, and this is very similar to what I started off with my composition video, is being inflexible. Not being willing to work with the composer to try to find a solution for something that is very difficult or something that you don't want to do or don't know how to do is not really acceptable in this day and age. I will say that obviously sometimes there are techniques that are dangerous for your instrument or dangerous for you as a person, and that's somewhere to draw a line. But instead of just going, no, I can't do that, you should come up with a solution, or at least propose a solution. For example, with me, I will not play in the instrument techniques on piccolo. That's something that I think will harm my piccolo, and I have research to back that. But I will give suggestions of things that will have a similar sound without harm to my instrument, or if they're really set on that, I'll give them options for a performer who's willing to do that. Because there are some hard lines that we're not willing to cross, and that's totally fair. But not having options for the composer and just saying, no, I can't do that, isn't fair. I also will say with that, if there's something that you don't know how to do, let them know and let them help you. A lot of composers are much more willing to work with someone who's interested in learning than someone who just says, no, I can't do that, and moves forward. There are a lot of things that are relatively quick to learn, and a lot of composers can help you figure that out or will be able to provide you resources to find it because they probably found out about this technique from someone or from something. One of the reasons I make the videos that I do is for that reason, so that there's resources for both flutists and composers for contemporary music. So, ask questions and don't just say no. I think that's the biggest turnoff for a composer is someone who just goes, no, absolutely not, I won't do that. The second thing is honestly not giving composers respect. I know a lot of performers who basically don't practice the new music stuff that's on their repertoire, or like if there's a new music piece in orchestra or some ensemble they're in, they don't even look at it, they sight read it. It's incredibly insulting to everyone involved in this project, particularly the composer who wrote the music that you are now ignoring. And it's obviously a very quick turn off to the composer. It's like, why would they want to work with someone who just doesn't want to give you the time of day? Granted, the people that do that are not people that composers generally want to work with in general, and generally performers that don't want to work with composers. But if that's something that you enjoy doing is playing new music and working with composers, never, ever take for granted a piece. Even if it's simple, work through it. Do not sight read in a first rehearsal when a composer is there. That is so insulting, unless, of course, you just got the part, in which case the composer obviously understands. But yeah, no, you have to give the composer your time, or else they're never going to want to work with you again. Part of this relationship is your investment in this piece. And if you're not willing to give any time to it, then don't expect to be called back. The next thing, and this is exactly the same of what I said in the composition video, is talking badly in public about composers or composers' music. Things get around. And again, venting is acceptable, and there are certain times where people need to be called out. But the majority of the time, it's just being nasty for nasty's sake or petty. And it will hurt you more in the grand scheme of things. If you didn't like a piece, that's awesome, cool. Move forward and just don't work with that composer again if that's not what you like. But don't badmouth them in public, because again, the same way a composer badmouthing a performer in public can get around to more than just that performer, it can turn off a lot of people. The same is true for a performer. Composers aren't going to want to work with you if you talk badly about a colleague of theirs, because again, what happens if you don't like their music? It's not worth it. The next thing is being unresponsive to a composer's inquiries. Obviously I said this the other way around in the composition video, but if a composer is asking you for your vocal range or for your comfort level with a certain technique, particularly if they're writing you a new piece, particularly if you ask them to write this piece and you don't respond, I don't really feel the need to explain why that's so insulting, but it really is. One of the things that I talk about all the time is this is a symbiotic relationship. While the composer is obligated to respond to you, you are also obligated to respond to the composer. And I would also say in that you're also responsible to ask questions when there's things you don't understand and not just push forward without asking said questions. You have to communicate, and it is your responsibility as well as the composer's to communicate. You have to ask the questions that you need to, and you need to answer the questions that they have, or else you will never have a collaborative experience, and these composers will probably not want to work with you again because they had to work so hard to get anything out of you. Next thing that is actually a huge pet peeve for a lot of my friends is not telling composers when you've played their music. This is true for people that have given you permission to perform the piece. They get royalties for performances, and so if you don't tell the composer, they can't report to ASCAP or BMI or whatever their organization is, and then they can't get paid. Keep your programs, send your programs to your composers, and let them know when things are happening so that 1, they can help promote it, and 2, they can actually get paid for the music that they've written and the performance that you've given, because it's worth it for them. It's not just about exposure for them. They do get royalties every time their music is performed. The more sinister side of this is performing music that you didn't actually get permission to perform. This is an issue that I see with a lot of people of sharing PDFs that you were sent by the composer to someone else, and then that person that you shared it with went on and performed it without ever telling the composer or without ever getting the composer's permission. Well, we see this all the time with dead composers, with the standard rep that we play. When the composer is alive, there are sometimes pieces that they don't want performed. They aren't comfortable being performed. I remember a few years ago, there was a piece that was programmed by a chamber music group in Chicago that the composer didn't give them permission for, and in fact was really not okay with that performing, and then had to contact the group to tell them, no, you can't program this. I didn't give you permission. This isn't published. So how did you get this part, basically? Don't share PDFs that composers have not told you you can share. Do not perform things that you did not either purchase from the composer's publisher or were given directly by the composer with permission to perform it. And then once you do perform it, tell them that you have, preferably beforehand, and then send a program after the fact. In the grand scheme of things, everything in both of these videos that I've made is about respect. It's about respecting a composer's time and a performer's time, and respecting the mediums that both of you work in and both of you are expert in. And as performers, we sometimes forget that the composer is not done with the piece once they pass it off to you or once it's published. They are still involved in the creative process, and we have to be able and willing to let them be involved. It's part of what this collaborative process is, and sometimes we need some reminders of that. Again, I want to know what you guys think. Are there things that annoy you about what performers, as a composer, are there things that annoy you about working with composers that you want to say? Are there frustrations that you have as a performer with composers? Like, what bugs you about this collaborative process, and what do you think other people need to know? And do you think I'm right? Do you disagree with me? Do you agree with me? Like, what do you think about this? Because obviously this is a little bit more pointed, as the last video was as well, but I think it's really, really important to talk about, and the response I got on the last video definitely reinforced that. So I wanted to make sure that I was responding in kind. Yeah. As always, if you like this video, give it a like. If you're new here, subscribe. I am traveling this weekend, so I'm not really sure what my schedule is going to be like, so I might see you next week. I might see you in 2 weeks.